The courtroom fell silent as 5-year-old Lily Thompson entered, her tiny hand clutching the leash of Max, a scarred German shepherd whose alert eyes scanned the room with military precision. Judge Carter leaned forward, his gaze softening at the sight of the child whose testimony could condemn a monster if only she could find her voice. Lily hadn't spoken a word since the incident 2 weeks ago. The defendant smirked from across the room, confident in the shield his lawyer had constructed. A traumatized child who couldn't speak was no threat to his freedom. But then it happened. As Lily's eyes locked with the defendant's, her small fingers trembled and formed a subtle gesture, a signal so slight only 2 beings noticed, the judge and the dog. Max's reaction was instantaneous and electric. The German shepherd's body tensed, his ears shot forward, and a low, controlled growl emanated from deep in his chest. Judge Carter's gavel came down with a crack that echoed like thunder. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," he announced, his voice betraying an urgency that sent whispers rippling through the gallery. "Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story." Lillian Lily Marie Thompson had once been a chatterbox, her kindergarten teacher often joking that she'd need to install a volume button on the spirited child. With copper curls framing a face sprinkled with freckles, she'd been the sunshine of the Thompson household until 17 days ago. Now, at 5 years old, Lily carried the heavy silence of selective mutism, her voice locked away since the afternoon she'd nearly been taken. Her green eyes, once dancing with curiosity, now held the wary vigilance of one who had glimpsed the darkness too soon. Sarah and Michael Thompson watched their daughter retreat into herself, helplessly witnessing her night terrors and the way she flinched at strangers. The pediatrician had recommended a therapy animal, a controversial choice that would alter their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. Max hadn't always been a therapy dog. The imposing German shepherd's history began in tactical K9 units, his powerful frame and keen intelligence making him an exceptional police dog under Officer James Martinez's handling. The prominent scar that ran from his right shoulder down his flank told a story of devotion and betrayal. 3 years ago, during a pursuit, Max had taken a knife meant for his handler. The department, facing budget cuts, couldn't afford his medical bills and rehabilitation. Abandoned after his service, Max had been scheduled for euthanasia, his wounds deemed too extensive. Dr. Jennifer Reynolds, a specialist in animal-assisted therapy, had rescued him just hours before his scheduled end, recognizing something in his intelligent eyes that transcended his broken body. And through months of rehabilitation, Max emerged not just healed but transformed, trained to detect and respond to emotional distress signals with extraordinary sensitivity. The first meeting between Lily and Max had unfolded in Dr. Reynolds' sunlit office, the child hiding behind her mother's legs while the dog maintained a respectful distance. For 20 minutes, nobody moved. Then, without prompting, Lily had taken 3 halting steps toward Max and extended her small hand. The German shepherd lowered his massive head, his breath warm against her palm. Something passed between them, a recognition of shared wounds, perhaps, or the simple understanding that sometimes the deepest scars aren't visible. Over 6 therapy sessions, the pair developed a silent language of subtle gestures and gentle touches. Though Lily still wouldn't speak, she'd begun drawing again picture after picture of a small girl and a large dog standing against shadowy figures. The Thompsons dared to hope that Max might be the key to unlocking their daughter's voice when the trial came. The afternoon of April 15th had been unremarkable, the kind of spring day that promised summer's approach. Sarah Thompson had watched from their front porch as Lily played in the fenced yard, the child's laughter carrying on the breeze as she chased butterflies among the daffodils. It was a Wednesday, Sarah's early day from Jefferson Elementary, where she taught 3rd grade. Her husband Michael would be home by 6, and they'd planned a backyard barbecue, simple family pleasures that would soon feel like artifacts from another life. At 3:42 p.m., Sarah stepped inside to answer a phone call from her sister. It lasted 4 minutes. When she returned, the gate stood ajar, and Lily was speaking to a man beside a black van parked along their quiet suburban street. Later, Sarah would replay this moment in her nightmares, the casual way the stranger leaned down, his clean-cut appearance offering no warning. the friendly smile that masked predatory intent. She called Lily's name sharply, already running. The man's head snapped up, his expression shifting from affable to calculating in an instant. He reached for Lily's arm. "I have puppies in my van," he told the child, his voice carrying across the yard. "Special puppies that need a little girl to take care of them. Don't you want to see them?" What happened next would become a crucial part of the prosecutor's case. Mrs. Eleanor Winters, a 74-year-old retired nurse walking her terrier, witnessed the man attempting to lift Lily into the vehicle. Eleanor's shouts drew the attention of two landscapers working across the street. The man released Lily, jumped into his van, and accelerated away so quickly that his tires left black marks on the pavement. Eleanor had the presence of mind to memorize the first 4 digits of his license plate. Lily, released from the man's grip, ran to her mother and buried her face against Sarah's legs. She hadn't spoken a single word since. Detective Robert Anderson arrived 20 minutes later, his weathered face grave as he interviewed Sarah and Eleanor. The Thompsons' quiet neighborhood had never seemed a likely target for such crimes, but Anderson recognized the methodology immediately. 4 children had disappeared from neighboring counties over the past 18 months, all approached by a man with puppies, all vanishing without witnesses. This was the first attempted abduction where the perpetrator had been interrupted. "Your neighbor's quick action, and those partial plate numbers might be the break we've been waiting for," Anderson told the Thompsons that evening, as Lily huddled beneath a blanket on the couch, her eyes distant. "We'll check traffic cameras in the area, see if we can track the vehicle." The investigation moved with surprising speed. Traffic cameras captured the black van heading east, and when cross-referenced with the partial plate information, led to a vehicle registered to Richard Collins, 45, a computer technician with no criminal record. A search warrant executed on Collins' modest ranch house initially yielded nothing suspicious, no evidence of children, no puppies. But a forensic team discovered something troubling in his garage, dog hair from multiple breeds, despite Collins owning no pets and a recently bleached concrete floor. When confronted with this discovery and the eyewitness accounts, Collins maintained his innocence, claiming he'd been helping a friend transport rescue dogs. His alibi for the previous disappearances seemed solid: work records, receipts, even witness sightings placing him elsewhere. Detective Anderson might have hit a wall if not for the discovery of a hidden external hard drive during a secondary search of Collins' home. Its contents, location data, and photographs of 4 children who matched the descriptions of those missing provided the breakthrough they needed. Richard Collins was arrested 8 days after the attempted abduction. Despite the evidence from the hard drive, the bodies of the missing children had not been found, and Collins refused to disclose their location. Without recovered victims, and with only circumstantial evidence linking him to the previous abductions, the prosecutor's case hinged significantly on Lily's testimony, that testimony that seemed impossible to obtain from a traumatized, silent child. District Attorney Diana Peterson met with the Thompsons in her office, its walls lined with photographs of children, some smiling school portraits, others serious-faced courtroom sketches. "We need Lily's account," she explained gently. "She's our only eyewitness who directly interacted with Collins during an abduction attempt. But I understand her condition presents challenges." Michael Thompson ran a hand through his hair, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "She hasn't spoken a word since it happened. The therapist says it's selective mutism brought on by trauma. We can't force her to relive that moment." Peterson nodded, her expression softening. "There's a relatively new program I'd like you to consider. Several jurisdictions have begun allowing therapy animals in courtrooms for child witnesses. The presence of a trained support animal can reduce anxiety and help children communicate." That afternoon, the Thompsons met Dr. Jennifer Reynolds and Max at the courthouse for an initial assessment. The room had been arranged to resemble the actual courtroom where Lily would need to testify, with a child-sized chair in the witness stand. For 30 minutes, Lily remained frozen beside her mother, her small fingers twisting the hem of her dress. Then Dr. Reynolds demonstrated a series of hand signals, explaining how Lily could communicate her needs to Max without speaking. "If you feel scared," Dr. Reynolds told Lily, showing a subtle gesture where the fingers curled inward twice, "you can signal Max like this. He'll come to you." To everyone's surprise, Lily mimicked the gesture perfectly. Max, attentive and dignified, immediately approached and placed his head gently on her lap. For the first time since the incident, Lily's face relaxed, her fingers burying themselves in the German Shepherd's thick fur. Dr. Reynolds explained that Max had been specially trained to recognize signs of distress in children. He can sense changes in breathing and heart rate. If Lily begins to panic, Max will respond even without a signal. We've found that the children often find their voices again when they feel this secure. As the trial date approached, Lily practiced sitting in the witness stand with Max beside her. She wouldn't speak during these sessions, but she would nod or shake her head in response to questions, her hand never leaving Max's fur. The prosecution team believed it might be enough if Lily could simply confirm or deny key details with gestures. They might secure a conviction. None of them anticipated how dramatically Lily and Max's presence would impact the proceedings, nor the explosive revelations that would unfold once the trial began. The morning of the trial arrived with a tension that hung over the courthouse like storm clouds. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes raised like periscopes searching for a story. The Thompson case had captured public attention, not only for the heartbreaking nature of the charges, but because it represented the first time in the state's history that a therapy dog would be permitted in the witness stand with a child. Precedent was about to be set, and both sides of the legal community watched with intense interest. Inside the oak-paneled courtroom, Thomas Wilson, the defense attorney for Richard Collins, filed a last-minute motion to exclude Max from the proceedings. Wilson, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for aggressive defense tactics, approached the bench with confident strides. "Your Honor, the presence of an animal in this courtroom, particularly one as large and potentially intimidating as a German Shepherd, creates an unduly prejudicial environment against my client. Jurors will inevitably form an emotional attachment to the dog and, by extension, to the child witness, compromising their ability to evaluate testimony objectively." District Attorney Diana Peterson rose immediately, her tailored navy suit a stark contrast to Wilson's more flamboyant pinstripes. "Your Honor, Lily Thompson is 5 years old and suffering from trauma-induced selective mutism. The therapy dog is not a prop but a medically recognized support mechanism, no different than allowing a witness with physical disabilities to use assistive devices." She placed a folder on the judge's bench. "I've included affidavits from Dr. Jennifer Reynolds and 3 other child psychologists attesting to the necessity of the animal's presence, as well as precedents from 7 other jurisdictions where therapy animals have been permitted without compromising judicial integrity." Judge William Carter studied both attorneys with the measured gaze of his 30 years on the bench. At 62, Carter had earned a reputation for strict adherence to procedure, his silver hair and perpetual bow ties becoming synonymous with old-school judicial propriety. What few in the courtroom knew was that behind his professional demeanor lay a personal wound that had never fully healed. 15 years earlier, his daughter Elizabeth had disappeared while walking home from school. Despite an extensive investigation, she was never found, leaving Judge Carter with a private understanding of the anguish that families of missing children endured. He had recused himself from similar cases for years, only recently feeling capable of maintaining the objectivity his position demanded. "Mr. Wilson," Judge Carter addressed the defense attorney, "while I appreciate your concern for procedural integrity, this court must balance multiple considerations, including the well-being of a traumatized child witness. The precedents Ms. Peterson has provided appear substantial." Wilson wasn't finished. "Your Honor, there's another matter. My client suffers from severe cynophobia, a clinical fear of dogs, as well as documented allergies to canine dander. The presence of this animal would not only prejudice the jury but would physically compromise my client's ability to participate in his own defense." He presented medical records which Judge Carter examined carefully. The courtroom murmured with this unexpected development. Sarah Thompson gripped her husband's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. If Max were excluded, Lily might not be able to testify at all. Without her testimony, the case against Collins would be significantly weakened, potentially allowing him to walk free, perhaps to attempt another abduction. Dr. Jennifer Reynolds, seated behind the prosecution table, leaned forward to whisper something to Diana Peterson, who nodded and addressed the court again. Your Honor, if I may, Dr. Reynolds informs me that Max is hypoallergenic due to his specific breeding and grooming regimen. As for the alleged xenophobia, I find it curious that a man supposedly terrified of dogs would use puppies as a lure in his attempted abductions. This appears to be a transparent attempt to exclude critical testimony. Wilson's face flushed red. That's an outrageous accusation. My client is presumed innocent. And MS. Peterson is already treating the allegations as fact. Judge Carter raised a hand, silencing both attorneys. I'll hear from Dr. Reynolds directly on the matter of the dog's allergen status, and I'll review Mr. Collins' medical history regarding this purported xenophobia. He paused, considering something. Court will recess for 30 minutes while I deliberate on this motion. During the recess, the corridor outside courtroom C buzzed with speculation. Reporters cornered legal experts for commentary, while advocates for child protection and therapy animal programs clustered in concerned groups. Inside a private conference room, Lily sat with her parents and Max, blissfully unaware of the legal battle being waged over the dog's presence. She methodically arranged colored blocks into patterns that only she understood, occasionally glancing at Max as if to ensure he approved of her work. In his chambers, Judge Carter reviewed the materials presented by both attorneys. Collins' medical records did include an allergy test from 3 years prior showing mild reactions to pet dander, but no mention of xenophobia until a diagnosis dated just last week, suspiciously recent. He turned to the case precedents Peterson had provided, noting that in Jackson County v. Simmons, a therapy dog had been permitted despite similar objections. His phone buzzed with a text message from his wife. Remember Ellie's face when we got her that rescue puppy? Do what's right, Will. The message pierced his professional detachment. Elizabeth Ellie, to her parents, had begged for a dog for years. They had finally relented on her 10th birthday, just 3 months before she vanished. The puppy had waited by the door for weeks afterward, whining for a child who would never return. When court reconvened, the gallery fell silent as Judge Carter took his seat. Having reviewed the materials presented by both counsel, I am prepared to rule on the motion to exclude the therapy animal. He adjusted his bow tie, a nervous habit from his early days on the bench. This court finds that the necessity of facilitating testimony from a traumatized child witness outweighs concerns about juror bias, which can be addressed through proper instruction. Wilson began to protest, but Judge Carter continued. As for the defendant's alleged xenophobia and allergies, the medical evidence presented is, at best, inconsistent. The dog will be permitted, but with the following conditions: the animal must remain in the witness box, separate from the jury. The jury will receive specific instructions not to allow the presence of the animal to influence their assessment of testimony. And finally, the defense may request brief recesses if genuine allergic symptoms manifest. He leaned forward, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom. Let me be absolutely clear to everyone present and to the public observing these proceedings. This court's primary obligation is to justice, which includes creating conditions where truth can emerge. If a child witness requires support to share their experience, this court will provide reasonable accommodations while maintaining the integrity of the judicial process. Diana Peterson nodded in measured satisfaction, while Thomas Wilson scribbled furious notes, already planning his appeal strategy. In the gallery, Sarah Thompson released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, tears of relief streaming down her face. For the first time in weeks, they had won a small victory. The ruling made headlines across the country by lunchtime. Legal blogs debated its implications, with opinions sharply divided. Conservative commentators warned of emotional manipulation in courtrooms, while child advocacy groups hailed it as a progressive step toward trauma-informed justice. Outside the courthouse, small demonstrations formed on both sides, one group with signs reading "Justice for Victims" and another with "Fair Trials, Not Furry Trials." As afternoon proceedings began, the judge addressed the newly seated jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you will notice during testimony that a child witness will be accompanied by a service animal. This accommodation has been made due to medical necessity. You are instructed not to allow the presence of this animal to influence your assessment of testimony or evidence. Your duty is to evaluate the facts presented, regardless of how those facts are delivered to this court." The weight of Judge Carter's decision became apparent as Lily Thompson entered the courtroom, her small hand clutching Max's leash tightly. The German Shepherd moved with dignified purpose, his training evident in every controlled step. Some jurors couldn't help but smile at the sight, their expressions softening despite the judge's instructions. Others maintained careful neutrality, conscious of their responsibility. Richard Collins watched the child and dog from the defense table, his expression unreadable. When Max entered, something flickered across Collins' face, a momentary tension around his eyes, so brief that only the most observant would notice. He whispered something to his attorney, who frowned and made another note. As Lily approached the witness stand, Diana Peterson caught Dr. Reynolds' eye across the courtroom and nodded slightly. They had prepared for this moment extensively, but no amount of preparation could predict how a traumatized 5-year-old would respond when facing the man who had tried to take her. Everything now depended on the bond between a silent child and her German Shepherd, and the ability of Judge Carter to navigate a proceeding without precedent in the state's legal history. What no one in the courtroom could anticipate was how the next few hours would unravel a mystery far more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined, or how a dog's seemingly simple reaction would ultimately save not only Lily's voice but another child's life. Lily Thompson sat in the witness box, her feet dangling above the floor, one hand firmly clutching a small stuffed rabbit, while the other rested on Max's fur. Diana Peterson approached carefully, her movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. The courtroom's usual formality had been modified for this testimony. Judge Carter had removed his intimidating black robe. The court reporter wore a colorful sweater instead of formal attire, and everyone had been instructed to speak in gentle, conversational tones. "Hello, Lily," Peterson began, her voice warm. "Thank you for coming to talk with us today. Do you remember me? We met at my office with your mom and dad." Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on Max rather than the attorney or anyone else in the room. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, his disciplined posture betraying his years of professional training. "Lily, I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened when you were playing in your yard. If you get scared or don't want to answer, you can just shake your head, okay? Nobody will be upset with you." Another nod, smaller this time. From her seat in the gallery, Sarah Thompson pressed a tissue to her lips, fighting to maintain composure as she watched her daughter's hunched shoulders and downcast eyes. "Can you point to the man who talked to you when you were in your yard? The man who said he had puppies?" The courtroom held its breath. Lily's head remained down, her fingers working rhythmically through Max's fur. 10 seconds passed. 20. Diana Peterson glanced at Dr. Reynolds, who gave an encouraging nod. Finally, without raising her eyes, Lily's free hand lifted and pointed directly at Richard Collins. "Let the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant," Peterson said, her voice steady despite the triumph she felt. It was a crucial moment. Lily had placed Collins at the scene, corroborating Mrs. Winter's testimony. Thomas Wilson rose for cross-examination, his approach considerably less gentle. "And, Your Honor, while I have the utmost sympathy for this child, pointing at my client proves nothing. She's been shown his picture repeatedly during preparation for this trial, and children are highly suggestible." For objection, Peterson shot back. "Defense counsel is testifying, not questioning the witness." Sustained, Judge Carter ruled. "Mr. Wilson, please confine yourself to questions for the witness." Wilson approached the witness stand, maintaining a distance that had been pre-established during pretrial conferences. "Lily, did your mommy and daddy tell you to point at my client today?" Peterson started to object again, but Judge Carter silenced her with a look. This was a legitimate, if unpleasant, line of questioning that addressed witness coaching, a real concern with child testimony. Lily's brow furrowed, and she shook her head firmly. Max shifted slightly, his body angling to place himself more between the child and the defense attorney. "Did the nice police officer show you pictures of my client before today and tell you he was a bad man?" Another head shake, this one accompanied by Lily's hand tightening in Max's fur. The dog remained perfectly composed, though those familiar with canine behavior might have noticed his ears tilting forward, a subtle signal of increased alertness. Wilson pressed on. "Lily, do you understand the difference between the truth and a lie?" At this standard competency question for child witnesses, Lily nodded. "But can you tell me what happens when someone tells a lie?" Here was the trap. To answer, she would need to speak, which she hadn't done in 2 weeks. Lily's breathing quickened, her eyes darting around the courtroom with growing panic. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward in her seat, concerned by the visible signs of distress. Before anyone could intervene, Max reacted to Lily's changing vital signs. The German Shepherd shifted position, placing his head gently on her lap while maintaining eye contact with her. The effect was immediate. Lily's breathing slowed, and her focus returned to the dog. "Your Honor," Wilson said with calculated exasperation, "this demonstration illustrates precisely why the dog's presence is prejudicial. The animal is clearly interfering with my cross-examination." Judge Carter frowned. "The dog is doing exactly what it was permitted to do, providing emotional support to enable testimony. Continue your questioning, Mr. Wilson, but be mindful of the witness's age and condition." For 20 more minutes, Wilson attempted to undermine Lily's identification through yes or no questions designed to confuse or contradict. Throughout, Lily responded only with head movements, her voice still locked away. When Wilson finally returned to his seat, the frustration on his face was evident. Despite his best efforts, the child had maintained her identification of his client through gesture, and the jury had witnessed her fear. As the first day of testimony concluded, an unexpected development unfolded. Officer James Martinez, who had been scheduled to testify the following day about the investigation, entered the courtroom to confer with Diana Peterson. As he passed the defense table, Max's demeanor changed dramatically. The previously calm dog stiffened, his eyes fixed on Richard Collins with unmistakable recognition. A low rumble emanated from deep in the German Shepherd's chest, not quite a growl, but a clear sign of agitation. Dr. Reynolds moved quickly to Max's side, using a hand signal to redirect his attention. The moment passed quickly, but not before being noticed by several jurors, the judge, and most significantly, Officer Martinez himself. "Your Honor," Peterson addressed the court, "the prosecution requests a brief meeting in chambers to discuss a potentially significant development." 20 minutes later, in Judge Carter's chambers, Officer Martinez revealed a startling connection. "I thought Max looked familiar when I saw the pretrial briefings, but I couldn't place him. Seeing him in person confirmed it. That's Ranger. He was my K-9 partner 3 years ago before he was injured and retired from service." "What relevance does this have to our case?" Judge Carter asked, though a sense of foreboding had already settled over the room. "During Ranger's, Max's last active duty assignment, we were pursuing a suspect in a child endangerment case. The suspect was never apprehended, but during the pursuit, Max was severely injured when the suspect slashed him with a knife and pushed him off an embankment. The department couldn't afford his medical care, so he was scheduled for euthanasia before being rescued by the therapy dog program." Diana Peterson's mind raced with the implications. "And you believe the suspect who injured Max might have been Richard Collins?" "I can't be certain without reviewing the case files, but the dog's reaction was unmistakable. K-9 officers develop specific responses to individuals they've encountered in high-stress situations. That wasn't a general reaction to a stranger, that was recognition. Judge Carter leaned back in his chair, processing this unexpected turn. M.S. Peterson, I assume you'll want to explore this potential connection? Absolutely, Your Honor. If Collins is connected to other crimes involving children dating back 3 years, it establishes a pattern that significantly strengthens our case. I'll a limited investigation into this matter, Judge Carter decided, but the court must be extremely cautious about introducing potentially prejudicial prior bad acts. Mr. Wilson must be informed immediately, and any findings must be submitted for review before being presented to the jury. The revelation set off a flurry of activity. While the jury was dismissed for the day, Detective Anderson pulled the files from the 3-year-old case. The description matched Collins in general terms: white male, 40 to 45, medium build, but the pursuing officers had never gotten a clear look at the suspect's face. The case had gone cold when the primary detective suffered a heart attack and the department, chronically understaffed, reassigned priorities. Diana Peterson faced a dilemma. The connection was tantalizing but circumstantial, certainly not enough to introduce as evidence yet. Nevertheless, the possibility that Collins had been preying on children for years, even injuring a police dog in the process, added urgency to securing a conviction in the current case. The media, meanwhile, had noticed the unusual interaction between Max and Collins in the courtroom. By evening, speculation ran wild across cable news and social media. Therapy dog recognizes predator? Blared one headline. Canine nose killer? Suggested another. Despite Judge Carter's instructions that jurors avoid news coverage, the defense grew increasingly concerned about contamination of the jury pool. The following morning, Thomas Wilson filed a motion for mistrial based on the dog's reaction and the subsequent publicity. Judge Carter denied the motion but issued stern warnings to the media representatives in the courtroom. This court will not tolerate speculation presented as fact, he declared. Any reporting that could influence these proceedings may result in contempt charges. As the second day of testimony began, Sarah Thompson approached Diana Peterson with something clutched in her hand. Lily drew this last night, she whispered, passing over a child's drawing. On the paper, rendered in crayon, was a clear image: a black van, a man with a knife, and a German shepherd. In the corner, barely legible in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Bad man hurt Max." Peterson stared at the drawing, a chill running through her. Has Lily ever heard anyone discuss Max's history? No, Sarah confirmed. We've been careful not to expose her to any case details. Dr. Reynolds only told her that Max was a special dog who helps children feel safe. When Dr. Reynolds examined the drawing, her professional demeanor slipped momentarily. This is remarkable. It appears Lily may have formed a connection with Max that goes beyond their short acquaintance, almost as if she's intuited his past trauma in relation to her own. As the trial proceeded through its second day, the prosecution called forensic experts who testified about the dog hair found in Collins' garage and the metadata from the photographs on his hard drive. Collins watched impassively, occasionally whispering to his attorney, but showing no reaction when Lily's drawing was entered into evidence. The real shock came that afternoon when the prosecution called a surprise witness, Margaret Collins, the defendant's ex-wife who had left him 4 years earlier. Petite, with graying blonde hair and nervous hands that continuously fidgeted with her necklace, Margaret took the stand with evident reluctance. Mrs. Collins, Peterson began gently. When was the last time you saw the defendant? 4 years ago, when I left him, Margaret answered, her voice barely audible. I moved across the country and changed my name to make sure he couldn't find me. Can you tell the court why you felt the need to take such drastic measures? Thomas Wilson objected immediately. Relevance, Your Honor. My client's divorce has no bearing on the current charges. Your Honor, Peterson countered, Mrs. Collins' testimony goes directly to pattern of behavior and motive. It is highly relevant to establishing the defendant's state of mind. Judge Carter studied both attorneys. I'll allow limited questioning along this line, but tread carefully, M.S. Peterson. Peterson turned back to Margaret Collins. "Why did you leave your husband?" Margaret's eyes darted to Richard, then away. "I found things on his computer, pictures of children. And I found a collection of collars, dog collars, hidden in our basement. He told me they were for a dog we were going to adopt, but we never got a dog. When I confronted him, he became frightening. I left that night and never went back." The courtroom absorbed this information in silence. In the gallery, Michael Thompson wrapped an arm around his wife's shoulders as she trembled. "Mrs. Collins, did your husband ever express any particular interest in children during your marriage?" "He worked it for an elementary school for a while. He volunteered at a youth center, too. He always said he liked helping kids, but something about it felt wrong. Too intense." She paused, visibly struggling. "After I left, I heard from a mutual friend that he'd been fired from the school for inappropriate behavior, nothing they could prove, but enough to concern the administration." Peterson approached the witness stand. "One last question, Mrs. Collins. During your marriage, did your husband ever express any particular feelings about dogs?" Margaret's brow furrowed. "He hated them. Said they could sense things about people that should stay hidden. When our neighbors got a German Shepherd, Richard installed extra locks on all our doors and windows. Said he didn't trust those kinds of dogs around him." As Margaret Collins stepped down, the pieces began falling into place. A man with a pathological fear of being exposed, particularly by the keen senses of trained dogs, who simultaneously used puppies as a lure for children. The contradiction painted a portrait of calculated evil that sent murmurs rippling through the courtroom. By the trial's third day, the atmosphere had grown increasingly tense. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of onlookers had swelled, divided between those supporting the Thompson family and a smaller contingent arguing for Collins' right to due process untainted by emotional manipulation. Several parents of missing children had joined the vigil, holding photographs of sons and daughters whose disappearances matched Collins' methodology but had never been solved. Inside, Lily remained silent but present, attending each day with Max by her side. Though she hadn't spoken, her continued identification of Collins through gesture and her responsiveness to carefully structured questions provided compelling testimony. The defense strategy increasingly focused on procedural objections and attempts to exclude evidence, sensing that the jury's sympathy had firmly settled with the child and her canine protector. What no one anticipated was the dramatic turn the case would take when Diana Peterson introduced the final piece of evidence, a weathered leather collar found in Collins' basement during a secondary search, bearing a name tag that would connect the proceedings directly to Judge Carter's past and set the stage for Max's most significant contribution to the case. The weathered leather collar sent a wave of tension through the courtroom when Diana Peterson presented it as evidence. Small and faded pink, with a tarnished heart-shaped tag that read Daisy, it seemed innocuous until Peterson called her next witness. "The prosecution calls Judge William Carter to the stand," she announced, her voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of her request. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Judge Carter's face registered shock, then comprehension, as he glanced at the collar in Peterson's hand. For a moment, the austere jurist seemed to age a decade before the court's eyes. He looked to the bailiff, who approached and took his place at the bench. "Your Honor," Thomas Wilson objected immediately, "this is highly irregular and potentially prejudicial. Judge Carter has been presiding over this case. His testimony would compromise the entire proceeding." The interim judge, Honorable Rebecca Martinez, quickly called both attorneys to a sidebar. After intense whispered arguments, she ruled, given the apparent relevance to a missing persons case, I'll allow limited testimony from Judge Carter, and after which we will address any motions regarding his continued role in these proceedings. William Carter took the stand, removing his signature bow tie and placing it carefully in his pocket, no longer a judge in this moment, but a father. Diana Peterson approached with measured steps, holding the small collar. "Judge Carter, do you recognize this item?" she asked softly. He cleared his throat, his his judicial composure momentarily abandoned. "Yes, it belonged to my daughter Elizabeth's puppy, a beagle mix named Daisy. The dog was a gift for her 10th birthday." "And when did you last see this collar?" 15 years ago. When Elizabeth disappeared, Daisy was with her." Neither came home." His voice cracked slightly on the final words. Behind the prosecution table, Detective Anderson was already on his phone, coordinating with officers to search Collins' property with renewed urgency. The connection between Collins and a 15-year-old cold case involving the judge's daughter created a staggering new dimension to the proceedings. As this dramatic scene unfolded, few noticed Lily Thompson's reaction. The child had gone completely still, her eyes fixed on the collar. Max, ever attentive to her emotional state, pressed closer to her side. Then, to the astonishment of everyone in the courtroom, Lily raised her hand in a stopping motion, the first intentional communication she had initiated during the trial. Dr. Reynolds moved quickly to Lily's side, kneeling beside the witness stand. "Lily, do you need a break?" Instead of responding to the psychologist, Lily turned to look directly at Richard Collins for the first time. Her small face, previously marked by fear, now showed something entirely different, recognition dawning with terrible clarity. Max sensed the change immediately, his body tensing as he positioned himself protectively in front of the child. "Your Honor," Dr. Reynolds addressed the interim judge, "I believe Lily is trying to communicate something important. May I facilitate this?" Judge Martinez nodded, and Dr. Reynolds retrieved a pad of paper and crayons from her bag, tools they had used during therapy sessions when Lily felt unable to speak. The courtroom fell silent as Lily began to draw with frantic energy, her crayon moving in quick, determined strokes. When she finished, she thrust the paper toward Dr. Reynolds, who studied it with growing concern before showing it to Diana Peterson. The drawing depicted a man who resembled Collins standing next to a little girl with a dog. Behind them was a house with an unusual weather vane on top shaped like a crescent moon. "Your Honor," Peterson said carefully, "I believe the witness has made a connection relevant to our proceedings. With the court's permission, I'd like to show Lily some photographs." After receiving approval, Peterson displayed a series of pictures, yearbook photos of various individuals, including one of Richard Collins from 15 years earlier. Without hesitation, Lily pointed directly to Collins, then made a gesture toward Judge Carter. Diana Peterson turned to Carter, who remained on the witness stand. "Judge Carter, did your daughter Elizabeth know Richard Collins?" Carter's brow furrowed in concentration. "No, I don't believe." He stopped abruptly, a memory surfacing. "Wait, Richard Collins. There was a young man by that name who briefly worked as an IT consultant at Elizabeth's school around the time she disappeared. I remember because the police interviewed all school personnel. He had an alibi. He was at a conference in another state." A murmur ran through the courtroom as the implication settled. Collins had been in proximity to another victim years before the current case. The defense table erupted in whispered conference, Thomas Wilson's face flushed with barely controlled panic. It was at this precise moment that Max, who had been closely monitoring Lily, suddenly stood alert, his attention riveted to Richard Collins. The German Shepherd's behavior shifted subtly but unmistakably, his ears forward, his posture indicating not aggression but intense interest, as if detecting something beyond human perception. Diana Peterson noticed immediately. "Your Honor, the witness's support animal appears to be alerting to something. Given Max's training and background, I request the court's indulgence to explore this reaction." Wilson objected strenuously. "This is absurd. We're now taking direction from a dog's behavior? This mockery of justice has gone far enough." "Your Honor," Officer Martinez interjected from the gallery, "as Max's former handler, I can confirm that this is a specific trained alert posture. He's not being aggressive, he's indicating recognition of a scent or stimulus he's been trained to detect." Judge Martinez considered for a moment. "I'll allow a brief demonstration, but with strict parameters." Dr. Reynolds approached Lily and Max with careful movements. Lily, can you ask Max what he's alerting to? Use the hand signals we practiced. In a moment that would later be referenced in law journals across the country, Lily made a series of subtle hand gestures toward the German Shepherd. Max responded immediately, moving toward the evidence table where several items from Colin's home were displayed in sealed evidence bags. The dog circled the table once, then stopped decisively at a particular bag containing soil samples taken from Colin's backyard. His posture rigid, Max performed a clear indicating behavior, sitting and placing his paw on the table while maintaining unwavering focus on the sample. Your Honor, Peterson said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, I request an immediate forensic analysis of this specific soil sample with expedited priority. Judge Martinez granted the request, ordering a recess while the sample was rushed to the crime lab. As the courtroom cleared, Richard Collins remained seated at the defense table, his previously impassive demeanor finally cracking. A fine sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead, and his right leg bounced in an unconscious nervous rhythm. The recess stretched from hours into days as forensic teams descended on Collins' property with renewed focus, guided by the specific area where the soil sample had been collected. In a small windowless room at the courthouse, Lily Thompson made another breakthrough, pointing to a map of Collins' property and drawing what appeared to be stairs leading downward. On the third day of investigations, Detective Anderson entered Judge Martinez's chambers with information that would forever change the direction of the case. In Collins' backyard, beneath a garden shed with a crescent moon weather vane, investigators had discovered a concealed trapdoor leading to a reinforced underground room. The space contained evidence linking Collins to multiple abductions spanning 15 years, photographs, personal items, and most disturbing of all, careful records of his victims. When court reconvened, the gallery was packed beyond capacity, with overflow rooms established to accommodate the journalists and public who had descended on the courthouse as news of the discovery spread. Parents of missing children lined the back wall, clinging to desperate hope that answers might finally come. Diana Peterson approached the witness stand where Lily once again sat with Max at her side. Lily, she said gently, we need to ask you something very important. The police found a hidden room at Mr. Collins' house, like the one in your drawing. Have you ever been in that room? The courtroom held its collective breath. Lily looked at Max, then at her parents, and finally at Richard Collins. For the first time in weeks, she opened her mouth to speak. Her voice, when it came, was raspy from disuse, but clear enough to carry through the silent courtroom. He's my uncle, she said. The statement sent shock waves through the proceedings. Michael Thompson half rose from his seat, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. Sarah covered her mouth, a strangled sound escaping her fingers. Diana Peterson, momentarily caught off guard, recovered quickly. Lily, can you explain what you mean? He came to our house once, a long time ago. Daddy called him Rich and said he was a cousin I never met. He took pictures of our family. Lily's words flowed hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence as Max pressed reassuringly against her leg. When he tried to take me, he said I should come with him because we were family. That's how he knew where I lived. All eyes turned to Michael Thompson, who had gone deathly pale. Richard Collins is my second cousin, he admitted brokenly. We weren't close. I hadn't seen him since a family reunion years ago. When he reached out wanting to reconnect, I didn't think I never imagined. His voice faltered as the weight of unwitting complicity crashed down on him. Thomas Wilson, sensing his defense crumbling, approached the bench. Your Honor, in light of these developments, I request a brief recess to confer with my client. Judge Martinez granted a 30-minute recess during which the courthouse buzzed with the stunning revelation. When proceedings resumed, Wilson addressed the court. Your Honor, in light of the overwhelming evidence, my client wishes to change his plea to guilty on all charges, with the understanding that the prosecution will not seek the death penalty. A collective exhale swept through the gallery, part relief, part lingering horror at the scope of Collins' crimes. Diana Peterson conferred briefly with the families present before responding. The state accepts this arrangement on one condition: Mr. Collins must provide complete information on all his victims, including locations of remains, so that these families may finally have closure. As the legal machinery shifted to accommodate the plea change, Lily remained in the witness box, her small hand buried in Max's fur. The German Shepherd maintained his protective stance, but his alert posture had relaxed now that Collins had acknowledged his guilt. What happened next caught everyone by surprise. Max suddenly lifted his head, his attention drawn to a specific evidence bag that an officer had just brought into the courtroom, clothing items recovered from the underground room. The dog's behavior shifted dramatically, not to aggression but to an unmistakable alerting posture. Officer Martinez recognized it immediately. "That's his live find indication," he said, voice rising with urgency. "But that's how he signals when someone is still alive." Diana Peterson turned to Collins, whose expression had gone blank. "Mr. Collins, the evidence suggests one of your victims may still be alive. Is that correct?" Mate." A tense silence followed as Collins studied his hands. Then, without looking up, he nodded once. "Where?" Peterson demanded. "There's a second location," he said flatly. "The cabin near Lake Meridian, northeast side, half-mile from the old logging road. There's a girl there. I left her supplies. She should still be alive." The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos. Judge Martinez immediately ordered a recess as officers rushed to coordinate a rescue operation. Within minutes, helicopters were airborne, heading toward the remote location Collins had identified. Through it all, Lily remained composed. Her voice now returned as she whispered something to Max that only the German Shepherd could hear. Whatever private communication passed between them seemed to satisfy the dog, who settled at her feet with watchful vigilance. As family members of missing children gathered in tense clusters, praying that it might be their child found alive, Sarah Thompson approached the witness stand. With the judge's permission, she gathered Lily into her arms, Max following protectively as they moved to a quieter corner of the courtroom. "You found your voice," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Lily nodded solemnly. "Max told me it was time," she said simply, as if this explained everything. "He said the bad man couldn't hurt anyone anymore if I helped." Later, experts would analyze this statement as a child's personification of the dog's supportive presence, but for those who had witnessed the extraordinary connection between Lily and Max throughout the trial, the line between trained therapy animal and something more profound had blurred beyond easy definition. 3 hours later, as the courtroom remained in recess awaiting news, Detective Anderson burst through the doors, his face alight with controlled joy. "We found her," he announced. "Emma Sullivan, age 7, missing for 8 months from Greenville County. She's alive and being transported to Memorial Hospital now." A woman near the back of the courtroom collapsed in joyful sobs, supported by family members. Emma's mother, who had never given up hope despite the passing months. The mood in the courtroom transformed from tension to tearful celebration, a rare moment of unmitigated victory in a case marked by tragedy. As the reality of Emma's rescue spread through the courthouse, Lily approached Judge Carter, who had been disqualified from presiding over the remainder of the case but remained present as a family member of a victim. With simple child's directness, she took his hand. "Max says your daughter is with the angels," she told him, her voice clear in the hushed room. "She had a puppy with her so she wouldn't be afraid." The elderly judge knelt to the child's level, his judicial reserve finally breaking as tears filled his eyes. "Thank you, Lily," he managed, his voice thick with emotion as he gently touched the German Shepherd's head. "And thank you, Max." In that moment, justice and healing converged in a courthouse that had seen too little of either. While outside, emergency vehicles raced toward Lake Meridian, sirens announcing the miracle that no one had dared to hope for: someone was coming home. Despite the jubilation over Emma Sullivan's rescue, a somber undercurrent flowed beneath the courtroom's momentary relief. The following day began with testimony that no one wished to hear but everyone needed to acknowledge. 5 sets of parents took the stand in succession, each carrying photographs of children who would never come home. Martha and James Wilson clutched a baseball mitt as they described their son Tyler, who had disappeared walking home from practice 3 years earlier. He was 12, Martha said, her voice steady despite the grief etched into her face. He loved the Cardinals and wanted to be a pitcher. His coach said he had the best arm he'd seen in 20 years of youth baseball. James couldn't speak, his shoulders shaking silently as he gripped the small leather glove that had been recovered from Colin's underground room. The Ramirez family spoke of their daughter Sophia, just 6, when she vanished from a park less than a mile from their home. Mrs. Ramirez, her accent thickening with emotion, described how they had continued to celebrate Sophia's birthday each year, adding a candle to the cake that no one would eat. "We never gave up hope," she said, looking directly at Richard Collins. "Even now, part of me refuses to believe what you have done." Each family shared not just the details of their child's disappearance, but the endless aftermath, the birthdays that became memorials, the bedrooms preserved like shrines, the younger siblings who grew up in the shadow of absence. Their collective grief filled the courtroom like a physical presence pressing against everyone present with its weight. Most devastating was the testimony of Eleanor Carter, Judge William Carter's wife, who spoke of their daughter Elizabeth with remarkable composure. She would be 30 now, Eleanor said, displaying a school photograph of a smiling girl with her father's eyes and a gap-toothed grin. "We've missed her entire adult life, college, perhaps marriage, maybe our grandchildren. Mr. Collins didn't just take Elizabeth, he took our future." Throughout these testimonies, Collins sat at the defense table, eyes downcast, offering no reaction to the suffering he had caused. His attorney had advised him to show remorse, but he seemed incapable of even this pretense. The families noticed his indifference, their pain compounded by his apparent lack of human feeling. Dr. Harold Freeman, a forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Collins following his confession, provided clinical context for this detachment. The defendant exhibits classic traits of psychopathy: an absence of empathy, calculated manipulation, and no genuine remorse. He understands that his actions hurt others, but cannot emotionally connect with their suffering. In his mind, these children were objects to possess, not people to care about. When asked about Collins' motivation, Dr. Freeman's explanation chilled the courtroom. "Mr. Collins described to me what he called collecting. He viewed children as perfect specimens to preserve, like butterflies pinned under glass. The fact that they would inevitably grow up made his obsession more urgent. He believed he was saving them from the corruption of adulthood." The testimony painted a portrait of calculated evil that defied comprehension. Collins had kept meticulous records of each child, photographs, personal items, journals documenting their time in captivity. The clinical nature of his crimes made them all the more horrifying, stripping away any possibility of understanding that might have offered the families even the smallest comfort. As these revelations unfolded, Lily Thompson's recovery faced a serious setback. Though she had briefly found her voice during the dramatic revelation of Collins' identity, and the cumulative trauma of the proceedings and exposure to the family's grief had reopened her psychological wounds. On the night following the parents' testimony, she experienced the most severe nightmare since her abduction attempt. Sarah Thompson testified about finding her daughter screaming in the early morning hours, inconsolable despite their best efforts. She kept saying the basement over and over, Sarah told the court, dark circles under her eyes testifying to her own sleepless night. When she finally calmed enough to speak, she told us she could hear the other children crying. Dr. Reynolds explained the phenomenon to the court. "Lily has formed a profound empathic connection with the victims in this case. Although she escaped physical capture, she has internalized the trauma of the children who didn't. This is a form of secondary traumatization, particularly severe in someone so young and already dealing with her own trauma." The setback necessitated Lily's temporary withdrawal from the courtroom proceedings. Even Max could not fully comfort her during these episodes, though he remained constantly at her side, alerting her parents whenever a nightmare began. The German Shepherd would place himself between Lily and the door of her bedroom, as if physically guarding her from threats both real and imagined. Michael Thompson's guilt over his unwitting role in connecting Collins to his family created additional strain. Though no one blamed him for failing to recognize the predatory nature of his distant cousin, he blamed himself. His testimony revealed the insidious way Collins had manipulated family connections. "He contacted me through a genealogy website," Michael explained, his voice hollow with self-recrimination. "Said he was researching our family history and wanted to reconnect with the Thompson branch. He seemed so normal, interested in family, polite, educated. He visited just once for dinner. Sarah made pot roast. He brought Lily a teddy bear." Michael's voice broke. "How could I not have seen what he was?" Diana Peterson gently reminded him that Collins had deceived everyone, employers, neighbors, even his ex-wife, for years. Predators like Richard Collins survive by blending in. They're experts at appearing ordinary. This offered little comfort to Michael, who had taken a leave of absence from work and begun therapy to address his guilt. The Thompson family, initially united by the trauma of Lily's near abduction, now struggled with this new dimension of hurt and betrayal. The toll extended beyond the families directly involved. Court personnel, jurors, even journalists covering the case reported difficulty sleeping, intrusive thoughts, and heightened anxiety around their own children. A local crisis counseling center established a support group specifically for those affected by the Collins case, which quickly reached capacity. Most affected, perhaps surprisingly, was Judge William Carter. Though disqualified from presiding over the remainder of the trial, he attended each day, sitting with his wife in the gallery. The discovery of his daughter's puppy's collar in Collins' possession had provided a terrible answer to questions that had haunted him for 15 years. But resolution did not equal peace. "I sentenced men to death row during my career," he confided to Detective Anderson during a recess. "I believed in justice, in punishment fitting the crime. But now, knowing what he did to my Elizabeth, to all these children, there's no punishment sufficient. There's no justice that can balance this scale." The collective grief reached its zenith when forensic anthropologists confirmed the identification of remains found on Collins' property and at 3 secondary locations he had revealed during questioning. Families who had lived for years with uncertainty now faced the finality of death. For some, knowing was worse than hoping. Through this darkest phase of the proceedings, Max remained a constant, strangely comforting presence. Though primarily assigned to Lily, the German Shepherd seemed to sense grief throughout the courtroom. During particularly difficult testimonies, he would sometimes rest his head briefly on a trembling hand or position himself near someone in obvious distress. These small gestures, a dog's uncomplicated offering of comfort, provided moments of connection that helped sustain those drowning in sorrow. As the prosecution prepared to rest its case, no one could anticipate that Max's most important contribution to justice was yet to come, or that a slip of Collins' calculated facade would lead to a race against time that would define the trial's final days. The 7th day of proceedings began with what appeared to be a procedural formality. Evidence recovered from Collins' cabin near Lake Meridian, where Emma Sullivan had been held, was being cataloged and presented to the court. Detective Anderson testified about the search, describing a sparse interior with minimal furnishings, a cot, a small refrigerator stocked with basic supplies, a portable toilet, and a bookshelf containing children's stories. The cabin was designed for extended isolation, Anderson explained, his professional demeanor masking the revulsion he'd felt upon entering the space. There were enough non-perishable supplies to last several months. The structure had been soundproofed with specialized insulation, and the windows were replaced with mirrored bulletproof glass, allowing light in but preventing anyone from seeing inside. As the detective continued his testimony, an evidence technician wheeled in a cart containing items recovered from the cabin. Most were bagged and tagged clothing, books, a stuffed rabbit that Emma had clung to during her rescue. One item, however, remained unbagged, a child's backpack, purple with silver stars, that had already been processed for fingerprints and DNA. Max, who had been resting quietly beside Dr. Reynolds in the gallery since Lily's withdrawal from daily proceedings, suddenly raised his head, his attention fixed on the backpack with the same alerting posture he had shown toward the soil sample days earlier. Dr. Reynolds immediately recognized the significance of his behavior and signaled to Diana Peterson. "Your Honor," Peterson addressed Judge Martinez, "the service animal appears to be alerting to the backpack. Given his previous accurate indication, I request permission to have Officer Martinez examine this reaction." Defense counsel offered only token resistance, as Collins had already pleaded guilty. Judge Martinez nodded her approval, and Officer Martinez approached the evidence cart. "This is a trained alert," he confirmed after observing Max's behavior. "Based on his past performance, I would suggest there's something significant about this item that requires further investigation." Detective Anderson examined the backpack more closely. "This doesn't match the description of any item Emma Sullivan had with her when she disappeared. We assumed it belonged to a previous victim." As the detective turned the backpack to examine its contents again, a small metal tag caught the light, an engraved nameplate partially obscured by one of the straps. He carefully adjusted the strap to reveal the full inscription, "Property of Jenny Banks." A sharp intake of breath came from the gallery. Teresa Banks, who had attended every day of the trial clutching a photograph of her 9-year-old daughter Jennifer, missing for just over 3 months, rose to her feet. "That's my daughter," she said, her voice breaking the courtroom silence. "That's Jenny's backpack. She was carrying it when she disappeared from her bus stop." Detective Anderson turned to Collins, who sat impassively at the defense table. "Mr. Collins, is Jennifer Banks alive?" Collins' attorney placed a restraining hand on his client's arm, but Collins shrugged it off. A strange smile played at the corners of his mouth, the first real emotion he had displayed throughout the proceedings. "I never said she wasn't," he replied coolly. Her courtroom erupted. Judge Martinez banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. When the noise subsided, Diana Peterson approached Collins with controlled fury. "Mr. Collins, as part of your plea agreement, you were required to provide complete information about all victims. You stated there was one living victim, Emma Sullivan." Collins leaned back in his chair, a calculating look in his eyes. "You asked about my victims. Jennifer isn't mine." The implication sent a shock wave through the courtroom. Teresa Banks collapsed into sobs, supported by family members. Judge Martinez ordered an immediate recess, directing the attorneys and investigators to her chambers. Behind closed doors, Collins revealed the truth that had been hidden beneath his solitary predator narrative. "There are others like me," he stated without emotion. "People who share my interests. We help each other sometimes." "You're claiming there's a network of child abductors?" Peterson asked incredulously. "Not a network. Nothing so formal. Just individuals with mutual understanding." Collins' clinical detachment made the revelation all the more chilling. "Jennifer was taken by someone else. I was holding her temporarily. A favor." "Where is she now?" Detective Anderson demanded. Collins' expression turned calculating. "I want guarantees. Witness protection in prison. A cell block away from general population. Or written immunity from any additional charges." Judge Martinez interjected, her voice cold with controlled rage. "Mr. Collins, let me be abundantly clear. If another child's life is at stake and you withhold information that could save her, I will personally ensure you receive the maximum sentence on every single count. To be served consecutively, your plea agreement will be voided. You will spend every remaining day of your life in a cell the size of a closet." Collins considered this, weighing his options with the same detached calculation he had applied to his crimes. Finally, he nodded. "Jennifer is at a secondary location, a storage facility in Addison County, Unit 23. The key is in my cabin, hidden inside the hollow base of the floor lamp." She was scheduled to be moved again tomorrow. He paused, then added with clinical precision, she won't be in good condition. It's been 2 days since anyone checked on her. Within 30 minutes, a coordinated rescue operation was underway. SWAT teams, medical personnel, and child psychologists converged on the storage facility, an anonymous concrete building on the outskirts of town. As they prepared to breach the unit, Teresa Banks waited at the courthouse, surrounded by other parents who understood her terrible limbo between hope and dread. The storage unit contained a makeshift living space cruder than the cabin where Emma had been kept. Jennifer Banks was found unconscious but alive, severely dehydrated and malnourished, curled on a thin mattress in the corner of the uninsulated space. Emergency medical technicians stabilized her condition before transport to Children's Hospital, where a team of specialists waited to address her physical and psychological trauma. As news of Jennifer's rescue spread through the courthouse, attention turned to the broader implications of Colin's revelation. If he was telling the truth about others like him, the case had expanded far beyond one predator. Detective Anderson immediately assembled a task force, coordinating with federal agencies to investigate potential connections between unsolved child abductions across multiple states. Collins, recognizing his value as an informant, began providing names, locations, and methodologies, each revelation more disturbing than the last. His cooperation was clearly self-serving, designed to improve his conditions in prison, but investigators carefully extracted and verified every piece of information, prioritizing the potential recovery of living victims. Back in the courtroom, Max's crucial role in identifying Jennifer's backpack had strengthened the already compelling case for therapy animals in judicial proceedings. Judge Martinez issued a formal commendation, noting that without the German Shepherd's alert, Jennifer Banks might never have been found in time. This court recognizes that justice was served not just through conventional investigative means, but through the extraordinary capabilities of a service animal whose contribution cannot be overstated, her statement read. Max's intervention directly led to the rescue of a child who would likely not have survived another 24 hours in captivity. The revelation of a wider conspiracy created a new dimension of horror, but also offered hope to families whose missing children had never been connected to Collins. Each piece of information he provided was meticulously followed up, resulting in 3 additional rescues within the first week, children who had been hidden away in locations scattered across 3 states. For Lily Thompson, this new development created an unexpected pathway toward healing. When she learned that her testimony had helped save not just Emma Sullivan but other children as well, something shifted in her understanding of her own experience. Dr. Reynolds observed that Lily began to reframe her trauma, seeing herself not just as a victim who had narrowly escaped, but as someone whose courage had protected others. This is a profound therapeutic breakthrough, Dr. Reynolds explained to the Thompsons. Lily is constructing a narrative where she has agency and impact rather than one where she is defined solely by vulnerability. For a child her age to find meaning in trauma this way is extraordinary. Much of this progress centered around Max. The German Shepherd had begun accompanying Lily to her therapy sessions, providing a constant, reassuring presence as she worked through her experiences. In the safe environment of Dr. Reynolds' office, Lily gradually revealed more about her understanding of her connection with Max. "He knows what it's like to be scared of bad people," she told Dr. Reynolds during one session, her hand resting on Max's head. "That's why he can help me be brave. We both got away." As investigators continued to unravel the network Collins had exposed, the focus of the trial shifted from a single predator to a systemic threat that had operated undetected for years. The implications extended beyond the immediate case, prompting reviews of cold cases, enhanced training for law enforcement, and new protocols for investigating child disappearances. What had begun as the trial of one man had evolved into something far more significant, a watershed moment in the prosecution of crimes against children, and to a compelling argument for innovative approaches to both investigation and the support of traumatized witnesses. On a crisp autumn morning, 3 months after the trial began, Richard Collins stood before Judge Martinez for sentencing. The courtroom was filled to capacity with families of victims seated in the front rows, their faces bearing the complex emotions of those who had journeyed through unimaginable darkness toward an imperfect resolution. Collins, dressed in a prison-issued jumpsuit rather than the tailored suits of earlier proceedings, appeared diminished, his calculated confidence replaced by the wary resignation of a man who had finally confronted the consequences of his actions. Judge Martinez addressed the court with measured gravity. In my 23 years on the bench, I have encountered many instances of human cruelty, but few that match the systematic predation demonstrated in this case. She faced Collins directly. You have pleaded guilty to 7 counts of kidnapping, 5 counts of first-degree murder, and numerous related charges. Your cooperation in identifying accomplices and locating victims has been taken into consideration, as agreed in your plea arrangement. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the gallery where the family sat. However, no cooperation can mitigate the profound suffering you have caused. Therefore, this court sentences you to consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for each life you have taken, plus an additional 30 years for each surviving victim. The sentence, though expected, brought visible relief to many in attendance. There would be no lengthy appeals process, no future parole hearings where families would have to relive their trauma. Collins would spend the remainder of his life in a maximum security facility, separated from the general population for his own protection, a concession granted not out of mercy but practicality, ensuring his continued cooperation in ongoing investigations. As Collins was led away, Diana Peterson addressed the families gathered in the courthouse lobby. This conviction represents just the beginning. The information provided by the defendant has already led to the arrest of 4 accomplices across 3 states, with additional investigations underway. And while we cannot undo the harm inflicted, we can ensure that those responsible face justice, and that other children are protected from similar predators. The broader impact of the case manifested quickly in policy changes. Within 6 weeks, the state legislature passed the Lily Thompson Act, establishing protocols for the use of therapy animals in courtrooms and allocating funds for trained service dogs to assist child witnesses. Similar legislation was introduced in 14 other states, with Max frequently cited as the inspiration. The German Shepherd's contribution to solving the case had captured public imagination, transforming him from a controversial courtroom presence to a symbol of innovative justice. For the rescued children, recovery proceeded at different paces. Emma Sullivan, who had spent 8 months in captivity, required extensive physical rehabilitation to address the muscle atrophy from prolonged confinement. Jennifer Banks, found just in time, faced a longer psychological journey, having endured transfers between multiple captors. Both girls worked with specialized trauma therapists, their treatment incorporating therapy animals inspired by Max's success with Lily. The Thompson family established a foundation dedicated to supporting families of missing children, focusing particularly on the period following recovery, when media attention faded but the real work of healing was just beginning. Michael Thompson, having confronted his misplaced guilt through therapy, became an advocate for awareness about predatory grooming tactics that exploit family connections. Sarah channeled her experience as an educator into developing age-appropriate materials to help children recognize dangerous situations without instilling unnecessary fear. Lily's recovery became a source of hope for many following the case. Though she still experienced occasional nightmares, her progress was remarkable. Dr. Reynolds published a case study with the Thompsons' permission and Lily's identity protected, documenting the therapeutic benefits of the child's bond with Max. The study highlighted how their connection had facilitated Lily's testimony and subsequent healing, providing a framework for similar interventions with other traumatized children. The relationship between Lily and Max continued to deepen as the months passed. On a December morning, 6 months after the trial's conclusion, the Thompson family visited a small ceremony at the county courthouse where a plaque was being dedicated to honor those who had brought Collins to justice. As cameras flashed and officials made speeches, Lily stood quietly with Max beside her. The German Shepherd now officially her permanent companion following his formal retirement from the therapy dog program. Judge William Carter, who had returned to the bench for less traumatic cases, approached the child and dog after the ceremony. His face, once strained with 15 years of uncertainty, now carried a different quality of grief, one tempered by resolution, if not peace. "You know," he told Lily, kneeling to meet her eye level, "before all this happened, I wasn't sure about having dogs in my courtroom. I thought they might distract from serious business." He smiled gently. "You and Max taught me that sometimes we need to look beyond traditional methods to find truth and healing. That's a lesson I won't forget." Lily, now 6 years old and considerably more talkative than during the trial, nodded solemnly. "Max says that's why he's a good helper. He sees things differently than people do." She had maintained this conviction that she and the German Shepherd shared a special communication, a belief her parents and therapist had wisely chosen not to challenge. Officer James Martinez, who had played a crucial role in identifying Max's former service as a police dog, approached with news that brought the story full circle. "I wanted you to know." He told the Thompsons that the K-9 training program has completely revised its policies for injured service dogs. No more euthanasia. They'll be evaluated for therapy work or adopted by suitable families. They're calling it the Max Protocol. Perhaps most significant was the reunion organized 3 months later when Emma Sullivan and Jennifer Banks met Lily for the first time outside the context of the trial. The 3 girls, each at different stages of recovery but united by their shared experience, gathered at a private equine therapy ranch. Accompanied by their families and therapists, they spent an afternoon riding gentle horses, sharing a picnic lunch, and simply being children together, an opportunity that Collins had nearly denied them permanently. As the day drew to a close, the 3 girls sat on the grass with Max, their conversation moving from horses and favorite books to more difficult topics with the natural resilience of childhood. Jennifer, the oldest at 9, expressed what the others perhaps felt but couldn't articulate. "I still get scared sometimes," she admitted, twisting a blade of grass between her fingers. "But then I remember that the bad people are in jail because we were stronger than they thought we'd be." Emma nodded, her thin face serious. "My mom says we're like those flowers that grow through sidewalk cracks. No one thinks they can do it, but they do anyway." Lily, who had been quietly petting Max, looked up with unexpected wisdom in her young eyes. "Max says we're all going to be okay. Not the same as before, but okay in a new way." As the sun set over the ranch, casting long shadows across the meadow, 3 families who had faced the darkest aspects of human nature found themselves looking toward a future that, while forever altered, still held promise. And among them moved a German Shepherd with a distinctive scar, once abandoned and broken, now a living embodiment of the healing that can emerge from even the most profound trauma, silent witness to the resilience of the human spirit and to the unexpected paths to recovery. In the twilight of our years, we understand the true weight of protection and justice. Little Lily and Max's story reminds us that even in our darkest hours, when innocence faces unimaginable evil, hope persists through unexpected connections. This German Shepherd, once abandoned, broken, and scheduled for euthanasia, became the silent guardian who helped a traumatized child find her voice and saved others from harm. It echoes what we've always known but sometimes forget, that healing comes through connection, that courage wears many forms, and that we are never too old or too young to stand against darkness. As grandparents and elders in our communities, we must remember this sacred duty to protect the vulnerable, to believe children when they speak, and to recognize that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from those with no voice at all. In a world that can seem increasingly frightening, Lily and Max remind us that goodness still triumphs, that broken beings can become heroes, and that justice, while imperfect, remains possible when we stand together. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.